Spring 1943 was a tense time on the Eastern Front. After the brutal defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler was feeling the pressure. He needed a win, and fast. So he set his sights on Kursk, a bulge in the Soviet lines that he thought could be his ticket to turning the tide. This was where he planned to launch Operation Citadel, a massive offensive aimed at crushing the Red Army once and for all. The stakes were sky high, and both sides were gearing up for what would become one of the largest tank battles in history. The Soviets were ready, though, having learned from their past mistakes. It was a game of strategy, and Kursk was about to become the stage for a showdown that would change the course of the war. The plan was bold. 2 German pincers, one from the north and one from the south, aimed to encircle Soviet forces. It was supposed to be Blitzkrieg Reborn, a lightning-fast strike that would catch everyone off guard. But here's the twist. The Soviets were onto them. They had intel, they had strategy, and they were ready. Imagine the tension as both sides prepared for a showdown. The Germans thought they had the upper hand, but the Soviets weren't just sitting back. They fortified their defenses, rallied their troops, and turned the tables. It's a classic case of underestimating your opponent, and it changed the course of the battle. Bold plans can backfire, especially when your enemy is prepared for your every move. Stalin had time on his side, and he wasn't about to waste it. Picture this. He fortified the salient with some serious defenses. Think minefields, trenches, and bunkers that could withstand a storm. Over 1 million Soviet troops were just waiting, ready to spring into action. And let's not forget about the 5,000 tanks lined up, engines revving, just itching to roll out. It was like a game of chess, but with way higher stakes. Stalin knew that preparation was key, and he was playing the long game, making sure his forces were ready for whatever came next. Talk about a strategic powerhouse. The Germans rolled in with their best, Panzer IVs, Tiger tanks, and those beastly Ferdinand tank destroyers. You'd think they'd have the upper hand, right? But here's the twist. They were seriously outnumbered. The Allies had a massive advantage in troops and equipment. Plus, the terrain? It was like a defensive strategist's dream come true. With all those hills and forests, it was tough for even the mightiest tanks to maneuver. So, while the Germans had some of the most advanced machines of war, they found themselves in a real pickle, battling not just the enemy, but the landscape itself. It's a classic case of quality versus quantity, and in this scenario, numbers really did matter. On July 5, 1943, the battlefield erupted. Artillery thundered like a relentless storm, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. This was the start of the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Imagine thousands of tanks, roaring engines, and the clash of metal as they charged into combat. Over 6,000 tanks faced off, with the Germans aiming to crush the Soviet defenses. But the Soviets were ready, fortified, and determined. This battle wasn't just about tanks. It was a turning point in World War II. The sheer scale of it was mind-boggling, with nearly 2 million soldiers involved. Kursk marked the beginning of the end for the German advance in the east, showcasing the resilience and strategy that would eventually lead to victory. It was a brutal, chaotic dance of war that changed the course of history forever. In the north, General Model's forces were really up against it. Picture this. Fierce resistance at every turn. Progress? Slow as molasses. Minefields were blowing up left and right, making every step a gamble. And those Soviet guns? They were roaring like thunder, raining down chaos. The Germans? They were bleeding, losing ground and morale. It was a brutal game of chess, where every move could be your last. The stakes were high, and the tension was palpable. It's wild to think about how every inch gained came at such a steep price. In the south, General Hoth was really ramping things up. His tanks were smashing through the first lines like they were made of paper. But the Soviets weren't just going to sit back and watch. They unleashed waves of armor, countering with everything they had. It was like a heavyweight boxing match, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This all led to the epic showdown at Prokhorovka, where the battlefield turned into a chaotic dance of metal and fire. You had thousands of tanks clashing, each side desperate to gain the upper hand. It was a pivotal moment in the war, showcasing the sheer intensity and brutality of armored warfare. The ground shook, and history was being written right there in the mud. July 12, 1943, was a day that shook the earth near Prokhorovka. Imagine over 1,000 tanks rumbling forward, a massive clash of metal and might. It was the largest tank battle in history, with the Soviets and Germans locked in a fierce struggle. The fields were a chaotic dance of fire and smoke, as crews fought bravely, knowing the stakes were high. This wasn't just about territory, it was about survival. The roar of engines, the thunder of artillery, it was a symphony of destruction. In just a few hours, thousands would be lost. But the determination of those fighting would echo through history. Prokhorovka wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point, reshaping the course of the war. The Soviets struck first, and it was a sight to behold. Imagine waves of T-34 tanks charging at the German lines, their engines roaring like a stampede. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it hard for gunners to see what was coming. It was chaos. Engagements happening at point-blank range, where every shot counted. The T-34s, with their sloped armor and powerful guns, were a game-changer on the battlefield. They didn't just push back the Germans, they turned the tide of the war. It was a brutal dance of steel and fire, where strategy met sheer determination. The Soviets were relentless, and that first strike set the stage for a fierce and unforgettable conflict. You know, the German Tigers were like the heavyweights of the battlefield. Seriously, their firepower was unmatched. But here's the kicker. They were slow. While these beasts were packing a punch, the Soviet tanks were like a swarm of angry bees. They'd flank the Tigers, ram them, and fire from every angle. It was chaos. Imagine a massive battlefield turned into a scrapyard, with burning steel everywhere. The Tigers might have had the firepower, but in a world of speed and numbers, they were just sitting ducks. It's wild how tactics can turn the tide, right? The air was thick with chaos, screams, the roar of engines, and the thunder of detonations. Picture this. Crews huddled inside their tanks, fighting for survival as flames licked at their hulls. It's wild how some tanks went up in flames before they even had a chance to fire a shot. Talk about bad luck. Meanwhile, others were still in the fight, their tracks blown to bits, but not giving up. They kept pushing forward, defying the odds, proving that even in the face of destruction, resilience shines through. It's a brutal reminder of the chaos of battle, where every second counts, and survival is a game of grit and determination. By midday, the field was a chaotic mess, just littered with wreckage. You could barely see the sun through the thick smoke hanging in the air. It was one of those moments where neither side could really claim victory. Sure, the Germans had pushed hard, but they were losing steam fast. You could feel it in the air. Their momentum was slipping away. The battlefield was a grim reminder of the cost of war, with every piece of debris telling a story. It was a turning point, a moment where the tide could shift, and you couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The Soviets really held their ground during Operation Citadel. It was a critical moment in World War II, and they weren't backing down. As more reinforcements rolled in, you could feel the shift. The tide was definitely turning. German forces, once so confident, started to realize that their offensive was faltering. They had planned this massive operation to crush the Soviets. But the resilience of those troops was something else. They dug in, fought hard, and with every passing day it became clear Operation Citadel was failing. It's wild to think how quickly fortunes can change in war. The Soviets were not just surviving, they were starting to push back, setting the stage for what was to come. By July 16, 1943, Hitler had called off the offensive, marking the end of the largest tank battle in history, Kursk. But don't be fooled, the impact of this battle was just getting started. Over 6,000 tanks clashed in a brutal showdown, showcasing the sheer scale of World War II. The Soviets, with their T-34s, proved they could take on the might of the German panzer divisions. This wasn't just a military engagement, it was a turning point. The Germans were forced into a defensive stance, and the Soviets gained momentum, pushing westward. Kursk wasn't just about tanks, it was about strategy, resilience, and the shifting tides of war that would eventually lead to the fall of Nazi Germany. The echoes of this battle would shape the course of history for years to come. The Battle of Kursk was a turning point in World War II. After Operation Citadel flopped, Germany found itself in a tough spot, losing over 50,000 men and around 1,000 tanks. That's a massive hit. Meanwhile, the Red Army was ready to roll, shifting gears from defense to offense. They seized the momentum, pushing back against the Germans and marking the beginning of a relentless advance. This wasn't just a battle. It was a game-changer that set the stage for the Soviet push into Eastern Europe. The tide was turning, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Kursk was a game-changer for Hitler and the Wehrmacht. Picture this, the largest tank battle in history, and it didn't go as planned for the Germans. After Kursk, they were on the back foot, and that was a huge deal. No more major offensives in the east. The Soviets, fueled by sheer determination and a massive war machine, were just getting started. They shifted gears, and suddenly the initiative was all theirs. The tide had turned, and the Wehrmacht was scrambling to hold the line. From that point on, the Soviets were unstoppable, pushing forward and reclaiming territory like a freight train. Kursk marked the beginning of the end for Nazi ambitions in the east. The cost of the Battle of Kursk was staggering, nearly 300,000 casualties on both sides. Can you imagine that? Thousands of tanks turned into twisted metal, just remnants of what once was. But here's the kicker. Despite the chaos and destruction, Kursk proved one undeniable truth. The Red Army could not be broken. They stood their ground against the might of the German forces, showcasing resilience that would change the course of the war. It was a turning point, a moment where sheer determination outweighed the staggering losses. Kursk wasn't just a battle, it was a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. From Kursk, the Soviets really kicked things into high gear, pushing westward and making significant strides in liberating Ukraine. It was a pivotal moment as they crossed into Poland, gaining momentum and strength. You could feel the tide turning as they advanced, inching closer to Berlin. The determination was palpable. Every town they liberated was a step closer to ending the war. It's fascinating to think about how these battles shaped the map of Europe and the lives of millions. The journey wasn't just about territory, it was about hope and resilience in the face of adversity. Kursk wasn't just another battle, it was a monumental clash of ideologies. Picture this. On one side, you had the relentless drive of the Soviet spirit, fueled by the desire to protect their homeland. On the other, the German forces, showcasing their military might and tactical precision. It was a test of endurance, where both sides pushed their limits, fighting not just with weapons, but with sheer willpower. Tanks rumbled, artillery roared, and in the heat of it all, steel
met will. The stakes were high. This wasn't just about territory, it was about survival, identity, and the future of nations. In the end, it was that indomitable will that prevailed, shaping the course of history. Kursk was more than a battle. It was a defining moment that echoed through time, reminding us that sometimes the heart can be mightier than the sword.